Welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders airsoft podcast. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Today, I've got Kirby here in the studio with me to talk all about Operation Last Refuge Homecoming, which I think technically is like Last Refuge 4, but also probably Last Refuge 5 if you consider the first Last Refuge that we did. But anyway, point is, this is sort of the wrap-up of the Last Refuge series. The Last Refuge series overall has featured the villagers and has centered around the villagers of Robin Sage. And this is the last game that we have, or the last event, I should say, where Robin Sage is going to make an appearance. Like, we're going to move the storyline away from that particular side of things. Now, it's not like the frontline field is changing. Like, we're still going to have the village there. But the idea of having these villagers doing, they're like scientist, like fungus type of situation, and then moving into like the vaccine and all that stuff. All that is sort of coming to a head in this event. This was also the first event that we and the team have hosted where actually I was not organizing this event. This is the first game or event, I should say again, that I played as, one of the team commanders since probably 2011, maybe 2012, something like that. It's been a significant amount of time. The last time that I would have been running a team at an event like that would have been Operation Battle, like a Battle for Stalingrad at Frontline many, many, many years ago. So Kirby, who is joining us today, was the main organizer along with ET, who due to unfortunate circumstances on the day of wasn't able to attend. But the two of them graciously organized the event so that I could run as one of the team commanders. This was also the first event that we've had at Frontline where the entire Storm Riders team was able to roll together as a team, minus those who were volunteering as organizers. And so we thought it'd be a good opportunity for us to chat, to get Kirby's perspective as the organizer, and then my perspective as really a participant who didn't have any special knowledge about sort of the ins and outs of the game plan, and to do a bit of an after action and talk about how all that went. So with all that being said, Kirby, thanks so much for joining me, man.
Oh no, thank you. I'm glad to be back. My 1 year vacation from the videos.
Yeah. And I mean, thanks again for organizing this event and taking the lead. I did help with some of the promo material and stuff, but fundamentally going into the event, I had no idea. And that was a really interesting thing, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. For your money, I guess, what was the thing that surprised you the most about organizing an event like this fully?
So I think that one of the biggest surprises actually was the amount of questions that I would get from people just leading up to the event of like, hey, can I do this? Hey, can I do that? So in the back of my mind, I kind of realized okay, you know what? There are a lot of, and this wasn't the team commanders. This was individuals who wanted as much sort of detail as possible because they really wanted to prepare themselves strategically, but also even just with their kit and stuff like that. But we also had a significant amount of new people who came out for this event who have flat out either never played airsoft before. This was legitimately their very first airsoft game ever, or it was their very first event ever. And I think it was just really surprising that, wow, these people have never played airsoft before, and they are willing to take the field and play for 5 to 6 continuous hours. And they seemed to have thoroughly enjoyed it from the feedback I was getting live on the field, but also again from the after action feedback from the survey as well.
What was your overall vision for this event? What did you attempt to do? Because we've talked about on the show many times, Frontline is a postage stamp of a field. It's not very big. The opportunities to provide different forms of gameplay, geographically, because of the size of the field, are pretty limited, so to speak. How did you want to approach this event, and what did you want to do differently to maximize the use of the field?
Yeah, so this time around, what I did slightly different was that typically in previous events, we would usually barricade off the entire village because in the previous Robin Sage series, leading up into part four, was that the villagers owned the whole village. So, what I wanted to do this time was I wanted to create an avenue for people to still be able to use the village without getting in the way of the villagers.
Hmm.
So this time around, what I did was I only gave the villagers probably 2/3 of the village, and I left what we call like old two story and church, sort of that avenue of approach open for both teams. Because what would usually happen in previous events is that it would always end up with a stalemate on D Day, because that was the only way you could go was through D Day. Which is a very open area and is really hard to cross. So my goal was to open up that sort of avenue of approach going through the village where they could go. The villagers wouldn't really care because you're not interfering with the village. But it was also where I put one of the objective flags down in the swamp because I feel like that part of the field we also never usually utilize as well. Things are usually surrounded around Big Fort and the village, which I mean, it's just structurally based on the design of Frontline. That's just how it's designed.
Hmm.
So that was kind of my idea was okay. Well, here's your barricade in the middle of Robin's Age. You can't go there, but you can go D-Day, or you can go through the outskirts of the village. And that I think that was my mindset was this should open up an avenue of approach. It mostly worked until the end of the day when CDF managed to actually take that avenue, and ACM paid the price for losing it.
Hmm.
Just trying to get out of their spawn was very challenging for them once they lost that avenue.
Yeah, and so for those of you who are listening, like the overall objective for the day was it was a typical like you have to collect victory points basically and to be the team that has the most victory points at the end of the day. And the only real objective that the commanders sort of knew uh, about in terms of victory points was area control. So you controlled these capture points on the field, of which there were four. And if you controlled it when a sit rep was called for, then you would get victory points based on how many you controlled, like one per point. And so when Kirby talks about having one of those capture points, like in the swamp, that was one of them. There was one that was closer to the ACM spawn, which was the other team from my team. We were running CDF. So one was closer to the ACM spawn, one was closer to the CDF spawn, and then you had two like roughly in the middle. One at the so you could call it the bottom of the field, and one at the top of the field. Like if you look at it horizontally, so one on the eastern side and one on the western side, basically.
Yeah.
Um, but the other piece of this event is really big into the role playing with the villagers, right? This is something that in the past I dedicated one person, so like typically it was Pat, who would run sort of the lore and the RP aspect of the village, and then I would focus on just managing sort of the admin of the rest of the event, like the missions and stuff like that. Um, I didn't have as the commander, like I didn't have any insight and as to sort of what the villagers would want, or like everything was to basically to discover like once the game started. What was your thought process and design intent behind the villagers for this event?
So it's really funny you ask because the design this time around was that the end of the day missions were supposed to completely revolve around the villagers. So the idea was that CDF, if you guys were winning, then you would escort the scientists and the vaccines from the field, which your team successfully did do, versus where if the ACM had done their actual fragos, which would have hopefully, at that time, they would have been the winning team. They would have actually moved in to take the scientist and bring the scientist to a extraction zone where they would have extracted the scientist kind of forcefully from the AO because the scientist did not want to go with ACM. That was the whole story. Was basically the villagers did not want to be a part of any government faction, and they didn't like the ACM. The only problem I ran into was that ET, who you mentioned was helping me sort of co-run this event, was handling everything from a village perspective, and I sort of pulled myself away from the village and focused strictly on the overall gameplay. And then 2 days before the event, ET had the unfortunate circumstance where he found out he couldn't attend. So that kind of really threw off the game plan for me for the village. Now, thankfully, the villagers were able to step up. The people we had were able to, pull together and make some stuff happen. But I wasn't really able to be a part of it as much as I would have liked to have been, just because I found without having ET on the field with me, I had a lot of back and forth between CDF and ACM. So I didn't really get to go into the village to check on them as much as I would have liked to see how they were doing.
Hmm.
Overall, my end of the day discussion with them was that everything seemed to have gone well. I know some of the missions I had, especially for CDF, was that you kind of had no choice at some points to go and interact because they had like a laptop at one point. That was one of your fragos. The only way to get the laptop was to go and interact with the villagers.
Hmm.
And then the ACM had a similar objective where they actually found items scattered throughout the field that they needed to trade to the villagers a little bit later, which would have earned them victory points. And they actually did that very quickly. I will give credit to the ACM that anytime there was an objective that they had to actually find it because it was hidden somewhere on the field, they did excellent with finding items. They were very thorough in their searching, which I was pretty happy with. But
How
yeah,
how thoroughly did you hide them? And this is not a
yeah,
dig, but one of the challenges that I've had in the
yeah,
past, as we've talked about, is that sometimes we hid them like really well and
yeah,
they just never found them because they either didn't look hard enough or like some of the ways we hid them were like maybe a little too devilish. So like
absolutely.
how bad were they hidden or how well were they hidden?
So one of their, I'll be honest, a couple of the cases were just never going to be found. There was actually one very close to your fob that your team never did find, because
Okay.
it was under a pallet near the crow's nest. But for ACM, they had one that was hidden near the sniper tower, which your team for a majority of the day was actually sitting on it. Like I could see the case and I could see your guys, but they just didn't line up and actually realize that there was a case within probably 8 feet of them. Now there was another objective. It was a little baggie, it was an orange decontamination bag that I hid under the floorboards of the old two story. Because if you go into the old two story, there's some floorboards that are like there are holes in the floor, and I hid it under the floorboards, and they actually did find it. Because now one of their Frago did say the specific locations of where these cases would be, like it did specify in the area of the old two.
Gotcha.
But that was the only hint they had, and next you know, someone's like, "Oh yeah, under the floorboards, there it is." I'm like, "Good for you."
Yeah. So I want to get into like the actual like order of the day or and how things actually proceeded in a second. But I guess the last thing I want to talk about the villagers is one of the challenges we've had in the past as well is that the village experience devolves into basically a bit of a circus sometimes, right? One of the things that I found at this event was that the villager experience was extremely cohesive. Like everyone you spoke to, it was you were getting not the same interaction because everyone had their personality, but like it wasn't just out to lunch, right? What did you find in your preparation was key to making that possible?
So for us, we did have two group meetings with the villagers, myself and ET, leading up to the event, and really breaking down. We actually had an entire Google Drive done up where it was like, here are the villager roles and responsibilities. Here are just the villager rules and stuff like that. And the big thing I pushed for with my people was that, you know what, like I want to, like I know this is a semi realistic mill sim. There are some things that are not mill sim like,
Yeah.
but I said to them, I said, the overall thing is like I want you to stay in character, and I want you to give people this experience that hey, the storyline is that you don't like the government. They've done terrible things to you. They blew up half your village, killed most of your people, and the CDF, you're kind of unsure where you stand with them because yes, well, they're former villagers, but they're also other former government officials, people you don't know, and stuff like that. So it's like, I really want more of a serious attitude put towards this. It's like, don't get me wrong, like you guys can have fun and stuff like that, but I did really emphasize the fact that I did want a little bit more of a serious approach to the villagers this time around. Just because, like, logistically, the way that the event was sort of structured, I feel like it just made more sense for it to approach that way. Where, like you mentioned, previous events, we've done some pretty
Yeah.
ridiculous things as
Yeah.
villagers. And I told them, I was like, you guys, like, you can create your own fun and your own scenarios, like, by all means. Like, I did give them a lot of control after our meetings. But yeah, from what I heard, and like like you just said, they did a very good sort of structured job at keeping everything pretty consistent.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I think, I remember like Jeff going around as like the village crazy person, and he was just like randomly giving out little bells to everybody. And like it was just that, it was a fun thing, but it wasn't like out to lunch. It wasn't like, oh, okay, well, now the crazy guy's going to try and take over the village. We have to execute the mayor and like all the things that we, had
Mhm.
previously done. It was way more cohesive. And I think that was a really interesting experience for sure, and definitely something for us to keep in mind, like if when we're going to be doing role players in the future, because we will continue to. It's not that just because Robin Sage doesn't exist anymore, it's not like we're not going to have role players. So I think that your approach was really solid this time, something for us to recreate.
Mhm.
So let's talk about the order of the day. I mean, like we did typical stuff that we always do. So we did the briefing the night before. There was a lot of people in attendance for that. I think we had I don't know if it's the biggest one, but definitely one of the more memorable ones. And then morning of, you still had a fair amount of people at the morning of briefing. But I can speak for my team and say like we were extremely well organized that morning, and I think almost all of our team, maybe minus two or three people, and then one person who didn't show up, were like on the field ready to go by start X. And I know you had to delay the game start by a few minutes. So do you want to like, how did your morning go? I guess is my first question.
Yeah, no, the morning went well. I showed up really early because unfortunately the night before we had some really really bad weather, so
Yeah, I remember.
we weren't able to set up the village like we typically would, or put things on the field. So I had to show up really early, and like all the villagers for the most part also were there by like 7:30. So big shout out to them for coming down and really like helping out because it was much appreciated. But yeah, the night before we ended up. So the grand total players, actually, counting the villagers that day, we ended up with 58 players on the field, which was awesome.
Hmm.
30 of those attended the night before the pre-briefing, which was phenomenal. But yeah, the morning of was mostly good. I was a little nervous because I after the briefing I had finished it. It was right around 7 minutes until the whistle was supposed to blow, and even just looking visually into the parking lot, I said, "Wow, I don't see a lot of green camo right now." And so when your team, like you mentioned, you guys were very prepared, and you guys were on the field. You were ready to go. At 9:45, the whistle was supposed to blow. I had talked to Brady briefly, who was the ACM commander, and he had said, "Hey, we have 9 people on the field right now." I was like, "Okay, that's bad." So we had a 5 minute delay because at 9:50 I officially blew the whistle because I didn't want to over delay the event.
Hmm.
And when I had blown the whistle, the ACM had 14 people on the field, so they were down approximately 10 people. And then at about 10:30, so about you're talking 40 minutes later, is when the majority of their team was officially on the field. So that was a bit rough from a gameplay perspective, just because obviously when one team starts with 20-25 people and the other team starts with their 14 or 15, it is a significant difference when you look especially at the size of that field and
Yeah.
how your 25 people are going to get into position pretty quickly, and you're going to have significant fire superiority. So yeah, that made the morning a little bit rough. But otherwise, in terms of the briefing, in terms of like chronoing and stuff, everything seemed to have gone well. One of the feedback things I did get back was that they had mentioned that a few people had actually mentioned it verbally as well, that maybe we should have 2 chronos running at one time instead of just one, because then obviously you're getting through chronoing people twice as fast, which I thought was actually extremely fair feedback. And maybe that would have helped get people on the field faster. I don't necessarily know, but
Hmm.
it's definitely something that I did consider afterwards. Seeing on the feedback was, yeah, maybe that could potentially help get that aspect done faster.
Yeah, I mean that's a fair point. We can certainly like something we can look at doing. We have the chronos. I don't know how much that would help, given that you already had like 30 people did the chrono the night before.
Mhm.
And is that the main concern? Like based on my visual observation of running these events, like is the problem that people aren't chronoed? I think it's people are showing up and they're faffing about more than anything, and just wasting time in the morning as opposed to just coming and like getting ready to go.
Mhm.
Because even those who like for example didn't do the briefing the night before like on my team they showed up early enough with the exception for John. They showed up early enough to get all that stuff done and then just basically wait around for the safety brief, and as soon as the safety brief is done everything is glued up and they can take the field, everything is ready. There's lots of people after the safety brief who are going back to their vehicle to finish up last minute things, and if your safety brief finishes 7 minutes before the game start it's a bit of a time crunch. But I mean, it's fair play that you delayed it by 5 minutes, because like our plan on my team was that like listen, as soon as the whistle blows, our fastest people are going to run up and start getting in positions and start engaging regardless of which sections they were assigned to, because I divided my platoon into 3 sections, like 1-1 Alpha Bravo Charlie. And fundamentally the game plan for the entire day was to just sit on one line and hold the 3 victory points behind us, deny the enemy from advancing, and then at one point strike out and take the D-Day for one, and then just basically win by points. That was the plan for the day. But we had no idea that the enemy were going to have an opportunity to deploy on the field early, which is also kind of weird given the fact that most of them were late, but that's beside the
Yeah.
point. Like, so you told me after the game that they basically got to deploy from their fob, but also halfway across D-Day, basically like on the Jeep on D-Day as an advanced patrol. How many players did they get to do that total?
So they were permitted to have an 8-man patrol who was going to start at that Jeep, because the logic for me was that they owned the area. So
Mm-hmm.
one of the advantages, I said, well, you guys technically own the AO. So what I want is that, and plus their mortar was on D-Day as well. So one of the things is, you guys will have an 8-man patrol who will start at that Jeep. And then that was one of the things where that was sort of my hope, because the thing is that, field wise, they were starting on the most difficult side of the field. So my mindset was, okay, if they have an 8-man patrol who starts there, it might sort of help balance out that morning, to where they will be able to get a small foothold until the rest of their team is able to get there. Because I anticipated that the CDF were just flat out not going to expect that, and you were going to see them expect them all to be coming from Thunderdome, and then you
Mm-hmm.
were going to beat them in that race from Thunderdome to D-Day.
Yeah, that's exactly what I thought was going to happen. It was like we were going to maybe not even beat them, but at least make it at roughly the same time. But
Mm-hmm.
they were already up there. I know that in terms of game balance, you gave them more special roles, so they had more SSWs, more DMRs, more bolt actions. Like we had one of each. Basically, we had one SSW, one bolt action, one DMR. Um, and so my plan was to send all the special roles, like everyone up there, because I knew that that was probably the place that we would have the most of the fighting.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the bottom side, like around like on the village where the 2-story is, like that the swamp area, I told my team like don't waste resources trying to take and hold 2-story. Just move into them, conduct spoiling attacks, because we know that in airsoft, as soon as you start shooting at people, they stop moving, more or less, right? So we're like, just shoot a little bit, move into it if you can with like one or two people, get up there, start shooting towards their like start area and Thunderdome, etc. But don't make any effort to hold it, right? Just peel back and just do that all day. That was sort of like what the plan was going to be. And you had said to me at the start, like, well, they're probably going to run your show for the first like 45 minutes, which I don't think ended up happening by virtue of the fact that they didn't have enough bodies in that first 45 minutes to actually hold that down. Like when we got to the D-Day landing craft area, sniper tower area, top of Green Mile, which is on the eastern side of the field, my guys were really surprised to see that they were already there, because they're like, what the hell? Like they must have run really, really fast. But they just started shooting, started engaging, started taking them out. And I think Brady was already up there with the advanced squad, and he was the team commander, and he was killed.
Yes.
which netted us a very early 3 victory points by just killing the commander, which would be a theme of the day. Theme of the day. Um, we found out, like in the rules, that killing the commander is worth 3 victory points if they die outright. So just shooting them wasn't enough. They'd have to die and then basically bleed out their whole time or all their lives or what have you. And so that was a weird thing for me because like I'm used to just going and being useful on the field. And I got killed at some point too, because again, like I wasn't approaching it from the standpoint of, no, like your role is not to be a gun in the fight necessarily. It's to be more mindful. And so after that, I was very careful not to let that happen again. But yeah, it was a weird dynamic to have, to be a commander and be worth something on the field, like for the team to go hunt, right?
Yeah, and actually, so speaking of, because I know, like you had mentioned, one of the things leading up to the event is that we had chatted a few times, and I said, my prediction was that yeah, you guys were going to kind of have a very difficult start to the morning,
Mm-hmm.
which you didn't. The morning, I thought the morning for the most part was fairly even, but there was a point where the CDF, where your team did lose severe momentum, and got pushed all the way back to your fob.
Mm-hmm.
So, what was that like for you from like, or like your team? Because I remember there were some guys in your team who had actually said to some of the game staff that they said, "Wow, we're getting rolled right now by the other
Yeah.
team." So,
Yeah. I think the biggest challenge that I did not anticipate as the commander is, I said to the other team, like to my teammates, I was like, the other team has access to a mortar. So what that meant gameplay wise is they could talk to you and basically drop. They had limited shots, but they could drop a mortar around somewhere, and anywhere within a 10-meter radius, right? So 30 something feet. Um, you would be killed. So what that would mean is you would go on the field and you would say, hey, I'm dropping a mortar, or mortar, whatever. And then the team would scatter. So with my team, I had told them, listen, they think this is an advantage, but it actually is not, because we know what they want when they drop a mortar. They want us to leave so that they can move. So our SOP was simple. If they drop a mortar near you, you fall back because you're not going to get shot. But all your teammates who are not in the vicinity of the mortar, what they need to do is increase the volume of fire to make sure that the BBs are zipping forward so the other team can't move forward. And I said, if they do that all day long, then we won't have a problem,
mhm.
right? Because yes, we can move away, but we keep the volume of fire up. They're not going to be able to move. If they move, they're just going to get shot by people who aren't affected by the mortar. So no big deal. What I did not anticipate is what happened at that particular juncture, which is that they did basically, like when you're talking about getting rolled, like it was literally rolling mortar fire. It was mortar and then placing a next mortar next to that one, basically forcing our guys to move further and further back. And no matter what, the other team would be able to advance because the people who are responsible for putting that volume of fire down were now responsible to move. Because either, like if you can imagine, the first group of people would fall back to the second group of people who are outside of mortar range, which is great. But now both groups have to move, so there's nobody left to put that mortar fire down. And so that pushed the guys back and all the way back basically to, like you were saying, to their spawn, which allowed them to get onto Blackhawk. Interestingly, I don't think they actually captured Blackhawk because they couldn't find the pylons.
No,
Because
they did.
did they capture it? Okay, well, because when I went up there, like the pylons hadn't been switched, so I was like, oh, okay, but maybe somebody else did. So, anyways, regardless, the thing is, for the players who were in that situation, they really felt like, oh man, we're getting rolled right now. And for me as the commander, initially I'm like, whoa, this is not good. But I have a bigger sight line than everybody else. And so while people are saying we're getting rolled, etc., John talks to me and he's like, well, actually, this isn't so bad, because even though, yes, our forces are being pushed back, are not actually prevented from moving. Like we still have movement on the field. So on this eastern side of the field, or northeastern side of the field, they're pushing all the way to Blackhawk, which is next to our spawn. And they're engaged with some people trading pot shots, etc. They've got 8 or 9 guys on Blackhawk. They have nobody on the southwestern side of the field. They have nobody preventing us moving across the swamp area, nobody preventing us from getting into the village, into the two-story, and so on. And so from my perspective, initially, I'm like, oh, this is no good. And then John's like, actually, this is fine. And we could take all of our people and start pushing into the old two-story, into that area without actually meeting any resistance. Start talking to the local villagers, start coordinating. My plan had been to hold that line all day long and not even bother with the villagers because the score would allow us to ignore them, basically. Once they start taking Green Mile and then onto Blackhawk, I'm like, okay, well, we need to pivot our strategy here. We are going to need to interact with the villagers, so let's utilize all that field. So that's ultimately what happened, which was great. It was a really good movement because obviously being in the village and talking to villagers was advantageous for us at that time, but also understanding that we knew that ACM would eventually run out of steam on Blackhawk. We're spawning right there. They're not spawn camping us, but we get to move 15 feet, 20 feet, and we're now engaging them. We're lobbing, shower shells, etc. in their area. Eventually, they're going to run out of manpower there because they're super, super extended. So I believe they ended up leaving. Most of them, their forces ended up withdrawing because they recognized that was not sort of sustainable long term.
Yes,
Right?
and so basically what actually happened was that they never had a medic up on Blackhawk. Both of their medics were still back in the D-Day kind of village area. So obviously I'm listening to Brady's channels the entire day with ACM, and it got to the point where he realized, oh wow, we have no foothold on the village and swamp. So he was trying then to start pulling his forces back, which ended up turning into basically a mass retreat instead of just kind of, bringing back maybe a third or half. It resulted in pretty well the entire team rolling back arguably too far. And that kind of resulted in them losing that momentum because then they got so distracted by, oh, wow, now Phil's team is in the village. Uh-oh.
Yeah, and when they pulled back, we were able to just flush our line back to where we were. Except now, instead of being just from the sniper towers and stuff like that, we're all that and also into the village, right? Mm-hmm. So we are basically bulged out from the line and in a really strong position. Like at that point, we're like, okay, well, yes, we lost. We didn't lose 2 victory points, but we got 1 fewer victory point than we would have wanted to get. Right? Or 2 victory points fewer than we wanted to get. But we're still well in the lead, mostly because we killed Brady a whole bunch too. So we're not concerned about that from the points perspective. And now we're in a very dominant position on the battlefield. So we're able to get our sections all, squared away, figured out. Johnny's in the village talking to the villagers. I was really hoping to be able to get like newer players to do the villager experience. But they kept wanting to talk to us, which, like to the command element, right? The people who are in charge, which makes sense. So the best I could do was just delegate John because we had the Alpha section with Tanner. They were responsible for holding the D-Day side of things. The Bravo section with Pat, they were responsible for holding the swamp and a little bit in the village. So we just had John and his guys basically plugging holes and going and doing different things. And so he was negotiating for all kinds of different stuff. Like we managed to get some resources from them. We managed to get the laptop, which was really important for a really important gameplay item. And all the while you're giving me my fragos. And it just so happens that the fragos are for things that we're actually already underway accomplishing. Like you get the first frago and you tell us, okay, well, you need to set up, defensive lines at the top and bottom, 2 main lines. We're already there. We get a frago. It's like talk to the villagers and set up some lines of communication. John's already talking to them. Right. We need to get secure the laptop, etc. John is working with that and, already liaising and setting up good relations. And ultimately what that worked out is they ended up liking us pretty well, I think, because we were respectful of their sovereignty. Like we weren't, trying to strong arm them or do anything like that. And that ended up resulting in them actually hooking us up with stuff that they stole from the other team. Which ended up sort of in the half, because we as the CDF did not have access to a mortar. But later on in the day, we actually the villagers managed to steal a case with like basically like drone rocket codes, like basically mortars, 6 mortar shots, and they stole that from the ACM and basically sold it to us. And so then not only were we in a really dominant position in the back half of the game, but now we have access to 6 mortar shots. It turns out to be 5 because Kirby can't count, but that's another conversation. um, but which allowed us really to think about, okay, well, how are we going to maximize sort of the use of the field? And that once we got those 6 mortar shots, for me, that was like, okay, do I even want to use these? Or is it just going to be too much? So I'm like, you know what? They've been dropping mortars on us all day. Like, I'm going to use some of them.
Yeah, and one of them came in really clutch when
Yeah.
they had the redeploy I gave them.
Yeah. Yeah, because this is something we've done in previous games too, where if one team is really dominating on the field, then you can get the other team to redeploy from an other area. So you can give them, I don't know how many players you let them pick. Like in the past, we've taken like 10 or 12 players and said, hey, 8, yeah, right. So you say, hey, commander, you pick 8 people, and then they can go and redeploy from another place. So in your case, it was you allowed them to redeploy from basically from the parking lot side, which is closer to our spawn. In the past, we've done it, a little bit, behind D-Day or whatever. It doesn't really matter, but it's like it's free redeployment of forces. And what was really funny is, of course, we as CDF had no knowledge that like you were planning this, so we just saw like 8 players, or it felt like their whole team, walking off the field. Like they had their replicas up and like with their dead rags on, etc., and they're just walking off the field. And we're like, initially we're like, okay, like what's going on? Like, are they pissed? Are they like salty and just walking off because we're winning too hard? Are they going to get pizza? Because that's still a thing that happens. Sometimes people order pizza and then they take a lunch break or whatever. And then sort of it clicked in my mind. I'm like, oh, this could be a redeployment. So immediately we pivot and we pull resources back, because we're like, the only place they could realistically redeploy from was the top northeast corner on Blackhawk, which is close to our spawn. So let's get some resources in place to make sure that if that's indeed what happens, we're ready to respond to it. And like I was talking to Cal, my 2IC, is like, okay, so what are we doing? And he's like, yep, this is my thoughts exactly. So we pulled some guys back, etc. And by that point, we had access to the mortars. So that did not really work out for them, right?
It did not. Plus, you also had Pat, who took on the entire 8-man redeploy by himself, which was super clutch. Yeah. He got smoked, but he took a couple down with him, which was hilarious to watch from my perspective.
And it's a good example of how like airsofters, as soon as you start shooting at them, they just stop moving, right? So you have 8 guys being held in place by one guy. Yeah. Which is crazy, right? Like that's not really how that should go. But apparently we had some friendlies in the woods as well who were shooting at them to sort of keep them in position. So
yeah, I was like giving Pat the glory of that moment. So
yeah, it definitely was glorious. But then it all came to an abrupt end for them when I realized where they were and just dropped a mortar on them. That was,
just
what can you do? Yeah.
And I think this is what's interesting too, is like you mentioned, like where the villagers basically were able to kind of get that case for you. And one of the things that like gameplay wise I was looked at was, so when I was creating the ACM objectives, the entire idea was that they were never going to have a good relationship with the villagers. Like they actually had a frago where that frago was to kidnap a villager. And Brady's like, why kidnap 1? And he ended up kidnapping 2 and then interrogating them and all this stuff. Like they did great, some great role play came out of that. And they ended up finding out who the scientist was. And then there was another point where Brady's like, you know what? The villagers hate us already. They keep threatening to shoot us. The CDF have us trapped right now. You know what? Let's just take the village. And next I get a radio call from the ACM commander going, hey, we just took the village. And from a game control standpoint, I was sitting there like, what do you mean you took the village? Because this was not something I was prepared for. And and the ACM commander was just like, yeah, we just strolled in and we shot all the villagers and we now own the village. And I was like, okay, this is not what I was expecting.
Well,
Um,
especially since they could only stay in there for 8 minutes, right? Because of the like the toxin or whatever that you had set
yeah.
up, which I think is a clever way of like making sure that the interactions with the villagers are more meaningful by saying, hey, you can only be in there for 8 minutes, and then
Mhm.
once that's done, you can't go back in for another half an hour. So you can't just like
Yeah.
cycle, you go in, go out, go in, go out. It's like you go in, you do your thing, and then you leave, right?
Yeah, and they actually made a really critical mistake because they knew who the scientist was. So Kaylee was a scientist, and what happened was she would have a green Sharpie, and when she would vaccinate you, she would put a green Sharpie mark on your hand. But on the flip side was the village shopkeeper was kind of this black market guy, bit of a scumbag type thing. He had a red Sharpie and had a different injector that was a fake vaccine. So what was happening was that all like Brady was in there and Brady got given the red mark. And after 8 minutes, the villagers were like, "Hey, you're dead," and he's like, "No, I'm vaccinated." And they were like, "That ain't real, Chief." So
Yeah.
I was a little confused because I was like, "You guys know who the scientist is? Like, how'd you let that happen?" So
Yeah. I mean, it's just those are learning experiences too with role playing and stuff. Like
yeah,
trying to understand and see, like ask the questions and be like, okay, but like why? Anyways, I thought I did not know any of this. Like the only thing that I knew is I knew that I got I one of the intel pieces that we got told me that one of their mission was to kidnap people. So we tried to communicate to them as quickly as possible, but obviously not quickly enough that people could be kidnapped. Um, and then at some point, you were like, hey, so they've taken the entire village hostage. And I was like, okay, but like for what? Because I always think it's kind of interesting in airsoft, especially in these types of events, like when you take hostages or you can like torture people for information. It's like there are no stakes. So how exactly is this going to work out? Because the people who are the hostages, they don't actually care about dying because they're just whatever, right? So I never really understood sort of the logic behind that, but regardless, so they're like, okay, well, they took the entire villagers hostage, and I'm like, okay, well that sucks, but we'll see. And then they ended up all dying because of the vaccine.
yeah,
They didn't have the real vaccine, so we're like, okay, we stroll in, we have the conversation. I think John got vaccinated, but not anybody else because we didn't really want to spend any time in there because like we didn't want to infringe on their sovereignty. Like it's their place. We're not there to put our nose in their business. Um, and then the big mission comes down at the end to be like, okay, well, you've got to identify who the scientist is, and you need to help them collect their information, and then you need to extract them because they're just going to dismantle the entire village. And then that's that point that the wall started to come down quite literally. The green team started attacking pretty fiercely, and then we just had to extract the scientists and then leave. And the last bit of it, I remember, like we're extracting the scientists, and all the green team is on top of the new two story, just watching us. They're not even like doing anything; they're just watching us leave. Which I thought was like, okay, I guess they're done. And we ended up calling it like half an hour early. I think
yes,
is that right?
yeah. I mean, there was a basically. I mean, I think it was from about 1:15 till pretty well up until 2 o'clock. You guys had full control, basically, of their
Yeah.
fob. So at that point, I knew, okay, like maybe the final objective, we'll get to see some movement. And even like once your team had completely pulled back towards their fob, I think the green team at that point had just, I think morale potentially had dropped out. They were obviously quite a bit gassed and stuff with this from, they were working hard. I mean, they were definitely trying their little hearts out. And I think there just came a point where they were like, you know what, like, we lost. Like, we are not going to kill ourselves over what is left to this event. And I think
Mm-hmm.
they basically kind of tapped out at the last half hour, which was totally fair. I mean, they tried, and yeah. So I mean, that was one thing. Yes, we ended up did calling it a half hour early, which no one seemed to really mind.
No.
And we were able to obviously do the raffle and stuff down on the field then after, which was nice. And I mean the thing is like majority of the player base throughout the day, whether it was CDF and their moment of getting their pushed in and or the ACM for the last hour. The reality is I think there were only probably 4 people who actually did not stay for the entirety of the event, which I thought was really impressive and super
Mm-hmm.
phenomenal, especially again for the amount of new people that we had that they managed to push through the entire day.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, like you said, it's always, people are going to come and go and stuff. It's just, you experience it a lot differently when your community is so small. Like four
Yeah.
people out of like a 40 something player game is like, it's 10% of your player base, right? So it is significant, but
Yeah.
you're right. Like games like this ebb and flow. Right. And so like when we're, losing and people are like losing morale, oh my God, this is like, but like you have to keep pushing, but it's harder to do that when you've already been doing that for like 3 something hours and you're tired, etc. I had told my team, I was like, in our briefings and stuff ahead of time, I was like, guys, like be prepared, right? Be prepared to push as hard as you can, like maximum effort, like all day long, come on the field with food, etc. And for the most part, like I think they were able to do that, and they we had some new players on our team as well, like for their very first airsoft games, and they seem to be very content. Obviously, it's easy to have a good time when you're winning. There's no
Mhm.
question about that. But overall, I think they had a really good positive first experience. What was the feedback like? What has the feedback been like since then? Like what are you hearing from players?
Yeah, so the consensus, firstly, is that people love the mortar feature, and people are like that needs to continue to come back. So I know this is twice now we've done this because you started that originally this year, and I
Mm-hmm.
brought it back again. People love it, just even for not even the fact of like the effectiveness of it, but just for just like the atmosphere that it gets to create and stuff for that. Like people are like, please continue to bring something like that back. The overall was that people did have a good time. People were happy with the objectives for the most part. They felt that the objectives gave them a lot of different options to do. Now, I won't lie. I believe the ACM had more creative objectives than the CDF, and that was just basically how the event was structured.
Mm-hmm.
Kidnapping villagers and stuff like that. Um, in terms of a villager standpoint, I'll be honest, it was almost a bit 50-50 because, like, people were saying, like, yeah, you know what, the villagers are great. We should always keep them around. But then there were some people who said, you know what, like this time I just felt that the villagers were there, but they didn't play as big of a role as they have in the past.
Interesting.
And don't get me wrong, because that was part of the plan going into this event was that yes, we wanted to have villagers, we wanted to bring back role players because people enjoy having that. But I didn't want the villagers to be the center of the event overall, and that's why I even shrunk the village. But yeah, people did say that the villagers just felt less used than they did in previous events, which I think is a totally fair response. The biggest consensus from I got from the ACM perspective was that a lot of feedback was that the only thing they would have liked to see is they would have preferred their fob to have been in a different location. A lot of people said, "Hey, you know what? Thunderdome was okay, but we would have preferred our fob being on D-Day because they feel that D-Day would have given them a more fair chance to leave their fob." And while I'm totally open to the feedback, I just feel that that's potentially not the case because the
Correct.
thing is,
Yeah.
D-Day is a more open field. You can put like the CDF could have put an entire team online, and then they'd be forced across a literal open field. But I think that's just the reality of, unfortunately, where we play at Frontline again. You mentioned being a smaller field, is that once your team kind of gets once the other team gets a good foothold, it's going to be challenging no matter what side you're on.
Yeah.
And yeah, so and I know we've tried D-Day in the past, and people have said that it was hard to get at the spawn. We've now tried Thunderdome, and people said it's hard to get at the spawn. So I mean, maybe next year, we'll be able to find a different method or a different way to work the respawns. It's obviously something people are usually always giving feedback on at the end of the events, and I feel like we still haven't found a way to perfect that. I don't know we ever will. We can continue to try and do what we can, but it's just one of those things where it's probably the hardest promise to make is that yes, we will fix this because the field is so limited based on size.
And the experience is so different as well, depending on what your players decide to do. Because like I always think about Thunderdome, people are like, oh, it's hard to get out of Thunderdome. It's like, well, is it though? Because you could go straight through the woods up to D-Day direct from Thunderdome and set up a line there, and suddenly you don't have difficulty getting out of there. But that requires your players to want to do that or be able to execute on that, right? The reality is we've had games where, and I think it was Operation, maybe it was Neon Sunrise, but like one team was starting on Thunderdome and the other team was starting in the little village area, and that team got completely encircled in the little village area, right? And it's to the point that I remember telling like Aaron Parsons, who was running the team at the time, to back off, right? And pull the line back to give them an opportunity to get back on the field, right? So it really is dependent on a lot of different factors, but you're right, like there's only so much that you can realistically do, right?
Yeah.
People saying, well, it's harder to play on that field from that side. I really wonder what would have happened if you swapped the teams, right? I think that you probably wouldn't have had as many problems throughout the day from that side, but also I think, part of it is we were extremely well organized, right?
Yeah,
I think
and
there's a big piece of that.
And I think that's one of the things, like while anyone who steps into a commander role, like God love them for taking on that role, because like it's not an easy job and it can almost feel stressful. I mean, I remember doing it at Maddox Cove and I remember what that was like.
Yeah.
But the thing is that I just feel that the CDF, like overall, is that you guys were just overall more prepared because you took. I feel, and I have no idea what the ACM were doing in the background. I mean, maybe they were, but I just overall feel like that your team was taking it a step further to be prepared for the, how to be successful. What happens if we don't do well? Like, what's our counteraction plan and stuff like that. And I think that just comes down to overall, like having, the right people around you to really back you.
Yes.
And a lot of that comes down to overall experience. Like the reality is that did the CDF have more experience players than the ACM by an absolute landslide. Now the ACM had some fantastic like heavy hitters in our community who are able to hold their own. Don't get me wrong, but I just think that the overall, experience of you and Cal and other like Pat who have been playing for 15 plus years and playing a multitude of different styles of events. You just kind of have that extra edge over everyone else when it comes to preparation.
Yeah, but I think you said something that's really, really important. It's very often when you get dumped into a commander role, like people, and I know this because I've experienced it myself in the past. It's like ultimately everything is up to you, and that's not the reality. The reality is like, okay, I have a vision of what this is going to look like, but I need people who are going to be able to, number one, advise me on like, okay, does this actually even make sense? And then number two, and then execute on it, right? And I think that's the big thing. Like when Cal and I were talking about the initial game plan, like he was giving me feedback on like I don't think this is feasible, or like initially we were talking about holding old 2. He's like, I don't think we need to do that. Like I don't think it's going to be feasible. It's not going to work. I was like, okay, let's modify that. And then on the day of, like especially when you're faced with no plan survive first contact with the enemy, and mine absolutely did not. Right? Because it was, so it's like, okay, what are we doing? And like, John's like, okay, well, I'm going to try and do this. What do you think? I'm like, yes, that's a great idea. Go ahead and do that. And now in my mind, the plan is changing because I know like what's going on. Like, and then the communications, which I think was an important lesson for us too. Like we had our overall platoon comms with you, and the platoon comms with the section leaders. And then each of the sections had their own section channel for the radios, and having to switch between channels all the time was a royal pain, and that's certainly not something that we're going to do again. I think there's ways around that that are going to be more sensible, so that's what we're going to do. I think because lots of times like I would call on the radio and nobody would answer because they weren't set on the right channel. They could hear me but they weren't replying because they weren't transmitting on that channel. So some stuff to look at there, but like the organization piece, I think cannot be overstated, right? Mm-hmm. Like I felt very prepared and surrounded by people who were prepared for the task. And so that also meant that in situations where things weren't going well, we were still okay.
Yeah.
Right. Like mentally, it's like, hey, we have a plan. We have a strategy. let's execute on what we had agreed our plan is going to be, make a small modification and just figure it out. And then as soon as that situation was resolved tactically, we went back to our overall strategy.
Yeah.
Right. And I think having thought that through made a big difference to what we were able to accomplish. And I mean, the proof is in the pudding, I think, because at the end of the day, like we were very, like our lead was very solid at the end of the day. Right.
Absolutely. And I think that,
Yeah.
one thing that we're going to see is, we do have a growing community. We've seen a lot of people who, came back probably for their second year of airsoft this year. We've seen people who jumped in. It was their first time playing airsoft. But I think that with our community, like they're going to live and learn, right? So the thing is that, people can learn from this and go, you know what, like at next year's event, they can go back and they can go, you know what, last year, these are things that maybe we did wrong or that we can do better. Let's work on that for this upcoming event. I think that,
Absolutely. Yeah.
as we roll out more and more and more events, people are just going to understand how important the organization and the preparation for these events really are. And like in a mindset, I mean, like this is a really small event compared to Maddox Cove, compared to some of the things that we have coming up next year.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, speaking of, I mean, that's really, this is the end of our airsoft season in terms of events. Like we don't have anything on the books until 2026. And one of the things that we have next year is Silent Resolve 2. Like that's our big flagship event for next year, which is going to be, the biggest event that hopefully the biggest event that we've ever held. Like hopefully we'll have special guests from all around the world, which would be amazing. Held in an absolutely amazing location with so much space, more space than we know what to do with, really, when you think about it. And like ATVs and access for those types of vehicles too, which is gonna shake things up. I mean, what lessons do you draw from this event thinking about planning for the next one?
Wow, that's a great question. I think the big lessons that I learn, or that I see from I feel like a game controller standpoint, a game creator, is that just really checking in with with the commanders and really pushing, like, hey, like these are things that's happened in the past. Like, is there anything that I can do to help, really help, or with your team, with your organization, to be set up for success? But I think also part of it too is just how to make the event more creative for both sides. Because I feel like a lot of times you see the event, you see like one team has like really fun objectives, and the other teams are almost a little bit more dull. And it's kind of like, okay, how do we give both teams so when they can walk off the field and they can be like, man, like that was our objective today, and that was such a really fun objective, right? I mean, I even like back, at Maddox Cove, I was on PRN and we were on defense the entire day. So like our day was a little bit more relaxed, or like we kind of knew what the day was, where like the ACM I think had the more cooler day and the cooler objectives. And I think kind of similar to this event is I think the ACM, like, while yes they lost ultimately, I think they just had a cooler day with like they had a mortar, they got the kidnapped villagers, like just different things like that, where your guys were kind of like attack and defend.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think just finding a way to create really different objectives for both teams, so people can just be like, yeah, I didn't just attack and defend all day.
Yeah, that's a really fair point. And often, even like you said, like as an organizer, you're almost trying to replicate. It's like, okay, well, there's the good guys and the bad guys, and like the bad guys are almost like the demo soldier, like they're just there to fill a body while the other team does something cool. So that's definitely something we'll have to think about for Silent Resolve. Kirby, thanks for being on and talking to us about Homecoming. Before we go, I just want to ask everyone who's listening, this year we are looking to get nominated for the 2025 Community Cultivator Award from the Random Airsoft Awards. So these are awards that are organized by random guy Kevin, who's like a YouTube airsoft personality. To nominate us for this award, you can go to rgkairsoft.com and you can find the nomination page. And you can, when you do the application for nomination, you can nominate a whole bunch of individuals, companies, products, whatever. They have all the categories. You do it all at the same time. Now, if you only want to nominate one thing, then you just fill that out, but you can fill multiple things. And I would suggest you could nominate the Special FX Airsoft Tourniquet as the best custom something of 2025, as well as you can look at the Flamingo Custom Works DF209 for the best release product of 2025. That's just my opinion. That's what I would nominate. But basically, the way that it works is that when you complete the form, you nominate, and then after the nomination period closes until at the end of October, so on October 31st, they're going to take the top 3 to put in the finalist list, and then everyone's going to be able to vote. So we'd love to get on that list. When we think about our community, their whole idea is bringing sort of airsoft to light in a positive way, and I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that the Storm Riders Discord is one of the most positive, which is to say non-toxic airsoft communities out there, and our Foreign Legion, of course, shows that it's not just like an online community, like it's really like a truly community of airsofters, from playing in like Belgium and California and New Zealand and everywhere else in between. So if you would like to consider nominating us, that would be a big help. Just go to rgkairsoft.com. And that's it. That's all we've got for you this week. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next week. Take care.